Is that okay? I can see it. So just Bernard, we need some several link to you, both YouTube and video.
Sorry, I couldn't listen to you.
Not too much.
I could not hear you. There was a problem with the sound. What did you say? I'm sorry.
I think you need
we're link.
I think you need to open up the button at the left bottom left side. There is like a video.
Yeah. It is. Video is cut and
yeah. So also sound.
You can't hear me?
We can actually, yeah, we can.
Yeah. Well,
but
so
we can,
what do
you need to open up your video, I think.
Do you want me to open your video? Okay, all right.
Yeah, because the audience would like to see you.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so everything is okay.
I thought you wanted to cut the video.
We are in the evening, so are you in the countryside or in Paris?
There is a problem with the sound. My sound is not very good. This is a problem.
But we can hear you very clearly. So I just asked you, are you in the countryside or in Paris?
Yeah, I am on the countryside, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And normally the signal is good, normally. Yes. Sometimes it becomes bad, but normally it's good.
Yeah.
So
you look very good because I think you are bicycling in the sunshine a lot. Because you look very,
Yeah, it was summer here for 2 months.
2 months.
And very, very hot, yes.
Oh, hot.
Yesterday it was 35.
Oh,
wow.
So
it's extremely hot.
Yes, it's completely abnormal here. But this is climate change. Now myself, I live on the terrace, and so yes, I have sometimes very nice times.
Could you
sleep without using air conditioning? Can you sleep without? No, you have to.
Yes. Oh. But I prefer. I don't use air conditioning. Yeah.
Good. No, it's extreme. It's really, it should happen in July or the earliest August. No, it's only so
yeah.
Sorry, I should talk to 严超。现在没有连上，刚才其实不应该断掉的，因为前面都是热场嘛，你断掉了等于就没有连上。现在有连吗？
你说哔哩哔哩吗？孙小楠在弄哔哩哔哩，已经开始了吗？
没有，现在连线了吗？刚刚连上。So we're waiting for the connection to the decision broadcast.
Take your time. It's difficult.
Yeah, we need 1 or 2 minutes.
Oh, Bill.
Hey. Just wait a moment. Okay, all Digital Future friends, welcome back. Tonight, it's a Shanghai time. Tonight, it's a great honor for us to invite two very important philosophers, Bernard Stiegler from France, and also Professor Lu Xinghua from Tongji University. So it's a great honor to have both of them here. The special background is coronavirus. So the post-coronavirus, we organized the 10th year of Digital Future event. So it's a great time. We have around 10,000 applicants, and finally we have 7 participants to this special event, participate into more than 80 workshops. In the past 2 or 3 days, we have a lot of panel discussion from all over the world, including Europe, including China, including South America and America. So the expertise and architects and theorists, they give us a lot different kind of thinking from different kind of perspective. So in the conversation with Bernard Stiegler and Lu Xinghua, I think the outlines of the concept focus on locality as a new strategy for how architects can work together. So that's the question we want to have today. So first, I would like to briefly introduce the 2 speakers today. Bernard Stiegler is the director of Department of Cultural Development at Georges-Pompidou Center in Paris. Also, he is a professor at the University of Technology of Pompidou, where he is teaching philosophy. Because taking up the post at the Pompidou Center, he was a program director at the International College of Philosophy, deputy director general of the Institut National de Audiovisual, then director general at Institut de Recherche at Coordination Music, IRCAM. Maybe Professor Lu can introduce more correctly. Professor Stiegler has published numerous books and articles on philosophy, technology, and also digitalization, capitalism, customer culture, etc. Among his writings, his 3 volumes of the English translations, Techniques and Time, 2 volumes of maybe Professor Lu Xinghua can introduce the books in English, because it's in France later. And also Stiegler is one of the founder of the political group Arts Industry based in Paris, which calls for an industrial politics of spirit by exploring the possibilities of technology of spirit. To bring forth a new life of mind, he published extensively on the problem of individuation in customer capitalism, and he is working on new possibility of economic contribution. And last year, it's a great honor invited by Lu Xinghua and me, and Professor Bernard gave a lecture in Tongji CAUP. I think it's a great, profound talking on the common ground in the new automatic society. And we spend a long time and make a lot of readings, reference to my students, PhD student and grad student.
I cannot hear anything. There's a problem with the sound.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. And briefly introduce Professor Lu. Professor Lu Xinghua is a professor and PhD advisor at the School of Humanities of Tongji University and School of Intermediate of China Academy of Art. mainly engaged in the research of contemporary French philosophy and the contemporary art theory. He mainly works including city philosophy, and especially he makes a lot of research on Stiegler's technological thoughts. I think he is a very special researcher on Bernard Stiegler. So that's a great honor to invite both of them have a talk today. So firstly, I would like to invite Professor Bernard Stiegler to make the speech. And then maybe Professor Lu, would you like to add something as a background introduction?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for the introduction. So I think according to the plan, I would would raise a lot of questions to Bernard. So it's not a lecture, it's about a conversation. So I am so happy to have Bernard with us this evening. Bernard should have visited us this spring, but there was the pandemic. So this Zoom meeting is some kind of makeup for Bernard's Chinese followers. And I think, of course, this is also a great honor for Bernard and me to be invited to this event and to discuss with the young architects across the world. It's a big event for us and also for the university. So without further ado, let me start the conversation with Bernard, okay? So first, I would raise a question about the intergenerational issues during the pandemic, because I found it very difficult to face my parents who are in their 70s and also my children. What should I say as a philosopher to them? It's difficult for me. If I tell them it's okay, it would be better. How to convince myself to to do that? So we know that Bernard have altogether 7 grandchildren. So I think I imagine that he must have phoned or talked with them at some moment, at a very vulnerable moment of the pandemic. So I would ask Bernard, if it's possible, please tell us, what did you tell your grandchildren to become, or that to comfort them, to make them feel safe? What you did say to them, and what would you like to have said to them?
Thank you for your questions. First, thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to discuss with my friend Lu Xinghua and with all of you. It's a difficult question, your question. I must tell you that I decided to invite my grandchildren for holidays in Corsica next month, in July, in order to reconnect and to discuss all of this, because during the confinement, we didn't have the opportunity to have discussions. I discussed with their parents, but with them, I had connections by phone, but the discussions were not about the pandemic. It was about, for example, music, because my youngest grandchild is a musician. He plays guitar, and we had this kind of discussions. We didn't talk specifically about the pandemic. Now, I would say that young generations have to be mobilized and helped by older generations in order to fight against entropy, what I call entropy with an A and an H. I will explain that later. And this is, first of all, the question of revalue knowledge, as it is structurally negantropic. And knowledge is structurally negantropic, but today it is destroyed by proletarianization, even by artificial intelligence, for example. And during this confinement, the pandemic, and we organized some things with the young generation, particularly with this young lady. She's a student in Paris, and she's on this photo participating to a demonstration on Les Champs-Élysées in Paris. And she asked for the teaching of entropy in secondary schools and high schools. And she also asked for an economy based on this fight against entropy. So I think that today we have to re-articulate, rearrange the relationship between generations for struggling against entropy, and by sharing new forms of knowledge, by reactivating knowledge. Today, for example, in France, entropy is not taught at school. And it is really a problem, because if you don't address this question of entropy, you cannot understand, for example, why happened this pandemic, that is the coronavirus. Because this pandemic comes from, you know that, it comes from what the IPCC calls anthropogenic forcings. That is a destruction of the equilibrium in between living, diverse forms of living things and the human. So we think that today we have to create confidence between generations. I guess that probably in China it's different, but in the West, in France, in America, in Europe in general, there is a loss of confidence between generations. And this is extremely dangerous because what is knowledge is what I call myself, what is transgenerational. And it is a condition of confidence. So, and confidence is also the condition of economic activity and political life. So I think, yes, the question of the relationship between generations is very extremely important. It is very difficult to manage for me as a grandfather and as a father. I try to, but I think that the most important thing is to organize social topics, social proposals, social organizations. This is the reason for which I created at the beginning of this year with my friend Jean-Marie Leclésio, who teaches in Nanjing University, and myself, I teach also in Nanjing University. We met in Nanjing and we became friends, and we decided to create the association of the Friends of the Thunberg generation. So this is what I say also to my children, to my grandchildren, you know.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, so intergeneration is a very important issue in many of your books. And I remember that in one of your books, the name is Catastrophe of the Sensible. And you told us that we even die in intergenerational relations, because the grandfather would prepare his own death around or for the younger generation. For example, if the grandfather wants to attract the grandson back to the farm, to inherit the farm, to do his grandfather's work, he has to find some kind of tricks to make that happen. So I think it's become more and more difficult for the older generation to attract the younger generation into their own causes. So it's really, I think, also a very big issue for myself. Considering that in China we are always following the Confucius tradition. Now, it's all about the intergenerational relations, that the son, the daughter should follow the instructions from the parents. But nowadays, because we are also entering a consumerist culture in China, so it's really a disaster for me. I think it's I will leave this topic behind. So next, I will try to connect philosophy and architecture. In philosophy, we have Immanuel Kant, who uses the concept architectonics. It's a very big word. It's about macro architecture, I think. It's about the how to develop structures for the nation, for university, for democracy. So it's really a big name. But I think we have forgotten the significance of this word. And nowadays we have tectonics. That's a discipline taught in computer science, I think. So I raise this topic because we need some kind of anchoring for contemporary architecture. So as a philosopher, I would ask you to define where is architecture today? Do you think architecture is in the genetic or algorithmic coding, or in the stack, that is the future infrastructure design, or in urban planning, as we traditionally understand, or in the building of software programming, or in the reconstruction of the deep structure for internet, or in the building of intonation, which you and your followers spent a lot of time in the last 5 years. So tell us, where do you think is contemporary architecture?
It's a very good question, a difficult one too. Let's say first that architecture means first drawing in advance a plan for a building, and then a process of anticipation by an abstraction realized as what we call today a blueprint. I call such a document, the blueprint, a hypomnesic tertiary retention, which means an artificial means for memorization. Probably the first the practice of such tertiary retentions by architects was preceded by this map, by this kind of map. This map comes from Italy. It was produced in a cave during the Paleolithic period, and it is considered to be the first geographic map. I don't know if it's true, but generally archaeologists say that. Now, when Immanuel Kant, after Aristotle, talked about architectonics, because the first one who talks about this was Aristotle, the word came from a kind of metaphor of building. For example, Aristotle said, there is first not metaphysics, but let's say philosophy. Under philosophy, there is geometry, under geometry, physics, etc. It was a kind of hierarchy and of construction of a hierarchy. Etymologically, now, architecture means in Greek, ordering techne and empiricity of the building workers. Now, architecture depends on the processes of what I call grammatization. By the word grammatization, I designate the process of reproduction and discretization of movement and flux, like speech, for example, or the movement of the manual worker that is grammatized by the machinery of the Industrial Revolution. And today, the work of the architect as it is grammatized by the building information modeling and process and management. So I think now architecture is not only planning through drawings, but referring to knowledge like geometry and physics. It is the case for a long time, from the beginning of architecture in a way, but now it is automatized with artificial intelligence, with databases, etc., through, for example, the new industrial norm that is building information modeling. But all of this is conditioned by what consists in what I call hypomnesic tertiary retentions. The building information modeling, for example, is the new age of such hypomnesic tertiary retentions, as they are automatized and completely computationable, calculable. In the 20th century, such a planning or programming became, as you said, an art in computer science. And some engineers in this field are called architects of information systems. The reference to coding comes from the convergence between architecture of buildings on the one side and softwares as they define architectural objects as coded data in databases. Today, with the building information modeling, and this is a video for promoting Autodesk solution using the building information modeling. Today, with this and with the Internet of Things, there is a large field of planning in which indeed we can say that there is an enlargement of the notion of architecture. And probably the future will be based on a new architectonic explaining how we must hierarchize the relationship, for example, between genetic coding, algorithmic coding, but also maybe law coding, political coding, economic coding. But I will talk about this later in the following the discussion later.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, so next I would try to raise the question of the Heidegger's famous theme of dwelling, inhabiting. So in the recent years, you have critiqued Heidegger for on many sides, particularly on his understanding of techniques. That's his critique is already very popular, but you said that his critique of techniques is not good, it's very problematic. So next, I would like to tell us on two sides what you find the Heidegger's concepts of techniques so problematic. That's the one. The other side is what would you help us to redefinition or to reinterpret Heidegger's concept of dwelling? Because if we understand techniques differently from Heidegger, it must be like a different dwelling we're going to face up to. So can you summarize your recent critique of Heidegger on these two sides?
Okay, I will try to. Concerning techniques and technology, it's a long and difficult question too, because I believe that Heidegger's position concerning this topic evolved in time. Now, myself, I tried to show in my first book, The Fault of Epimetheus, that the basis of the problem is in Sein und Zeit, in the last paragraphs of Sein und Zeit. When Heidegger says that maybe we should address the question of what he calls the Weltgeschichtlichkeit, this meaning antiquity, antiquaries, objects testifying for the past, etc., etc. That is what I call myself tertiary retentions. That is artificial memory, if you prefer. And Heidegger hesitates in between the paragraph 76, 77. And he says, maybe we should consider it as the originary sphere of temporality. But at the end, he decides to exclude it from the originary temporality. Why? It is because he considers that techniques is always submitted to calculation. And he says that temporality is never calculated. It is always overcoming. It is always situated beyond calculation. Calculation, he calls that in Zion side, besorgen. And he says that Sorge is never reducible to calculation. And I agree with him. But I claim that what I call tertiary retentions and what he calls Weltgeschichtlichkeit is never reducible itself to calculation. This is a question of what I call the pharmacon. And as you know, in the question concerning technology, that is maybe 20 years after Zion-Tite, he says that technology is a kind of pharmacon. He doesn't use the word pharmacon, but he cites Hölderlin about the danger and saving. So he says, where is the danger is also saving, etc., etc. So I think that in this second time, that is the time of what he calls turning. The question of enframing, that is a question of, in German, Gestell, appears, and it is much more complicated at this time than in Zeit und Zeit, and much more interesting. Gestell itself is a question of cybernetics and calculation for Heidegger as the process by which the biosphere, in the sense of Vladimir Vernadsky, becomes a technosphere. And for me, the difficulty with Heidegger is that he partly misunderstands the question of entropy and negentropy, as it is exposed, for example, here for the question of entropy, and here for the question of negentropy. To dwell is to take care of the place you dwell. Now, considered from the perspective of life as Erwin Schrödinger defined it, and moreover of existence as the noetic and technical way of life, sparing and preserving, which is expressed and practiced by, as in German, Sorge, in English, caring, this always means fight against entropy. Here we must add that dwelling refers to housing, that is home. And home means privacy, self, intimacy, etc. Houses are places in which appears the possibility of existence in the sense of Zion-Tite. In other words, places for time as it is existential and not only physical. Homeless people, for example, are deprived from such an existence. A home, a house, is a microcosmos in a macrocosmos. Building can also deprive people from real possibility for existence. If it is true that a home is also located somewhere, and that such a where, that is also called Ort by Heidegger, and sometimes Lichtung, constitutes a place for a city, as it is a site of the polis, as Heidegger says in this book. The polis being a macrocosmos in the cosmos. The polis makes possible the arrangement between the psychic individual and the processes of collective individuation in which it takes part. For such an arrangement, the tension between mortals and immortals, gods in the sense of Heidegger, is a tension between existence and spirits, coming from what I call noetic necromass. I say noetic necromass in the sense in which Vladimir Vernadsky said that on Earth, you have the biosphere, and the biosphere is based on what he calls the biomass. We are belonging to the biomass, like trees, animals, virus, bacteria, etc., etc. And there is also what Vernadsky calls the necromass, that is humus. Now, I believe myself that there is a noetic necromass. What is a noetic necromass? It is the accumulation of works under a form that is technical, that is constituting exactly what Heidegger called Weltgeschichtlichkeit. And the question is the ways to access such a noetic necromass. A school of architecture, for example, is a way in order to access to the noetic necromass in the field of architecture. And university is a way in order to access, for example, mathematics, philosophy, history, arts, etc., as the noetic necromass. So these institutions are institutions for cultivation of this necromass, for making, by this cultivation, new forms of noetic life appearing. And this is a cultivation of what we call knowledge. And dwelling is a kind of knowledge. Now, to access to such a noetic necromass is always conditioned by technology and techniques. And here appears the question of technology as it transforms through infrastructures the dwelling at the level of the city and beyond the city of the country. This transformation, and now not only of the country, but of the technosphere, that is at the level of the biosphere. For example, the coronavirus and the pandemic are exactly an expression of the becoming technospheric of this biosphere. This transformation by technology, which is based today on computational hypomnesic tertiary attention as algorithms, is an industrial exploitation of memory, which can destroy this noetic necromass, exactly like the exploitation of humus by industrial agriculture sterilize this humus and engender desertification. Personally, I claim that such an arrangement between the psychic individual and the processes of collective individuation is always a kind of negotiation between entropy and negentropy. And such a negotiation is always a cultivation of knowledge. And the question of political economy as the articulation in between economics as such and the forms of cities, of countries. They are never based only on economics. Economics is based on calculation, and dwelling is never reducible to calculation. This is a question that is opened by Heidegger. But yes, I agree with you. I don't follow Heidegger in his analysis because of first the question of his misinterpretation of techniques and technology, the role of techniques and technology in the production of temporality, in the originary temporality of existence, and because he is incapable to address the question of entropy and negentropy. He rejected these notions.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. It's great reinterpretation of Heidegger's concepts, and it's really very significant for me. So next, I would pass into a very traditional topic for the architects. It's from Karl Marx. You talked about his theme of architect and be many times. And you said that in his cooperation with Engels, the German ideology, Marx got it right that human labor is socially organized, that when it contributes to economy, it's mobilize a lot of aspects to form abstract labor. But in Capital, Marx seems to relax from that kind of thinking and become more conservative. In Capital, Marx told us that when the bee built his nets, he only used his own organs. But if human architect built a house, he uses his ideas or drawings or designs. So you critique Marx on his misunderstanding of technology when he used this metaphor. So I think it would be very useful if you further explain this theme to young architects, because it tells everything about what architecture should do in the Anthropocene. And I think it's a very good introduction to your concept used very often recently. It's exosimization. So this metaphor would help us a lot to talk further about what architects should do for the what do you call the Anthropocene. It's so I hope you to elaborate on, summarize your discussions on this topic.
Okay, thank you, Xinghua. Yes, this is a topic I developed a lot in Nanjing University during the previous years, because I consider that we have to reinterpret Marxism in a new way. I believe that today people insist too much on Das Kapital. That is, of course, an extremely important book. But for me, it's not the most interesting one from the philosophical point of view in Marx's work. I consider that, as you said, German ideology is the most important position of Marx, when with Engels, they claim that the point of departure of any kind of philosophy or economy is the fact that the human produces his organs, and those organs are artificial. This is a kind of continuation of discussion of Heidegger's, the German philosopher Heidegger's thesis, against which Immanuel Kant wrote an article, a paper, for explaining that Heidegger was stupid when trying to find what himself he calls the transcendental conditions of knowledge into the feet of the human. Because Heidegger said, maybe this condition of knowledge is based on the transformation of the body of the monkey, of the ape, into the one of the biped, that is the human, and the making free the hands for making tools, etc., etc. Kant said this is completely stupid. And Marx and Engels say, no, it's not at all stupid. It is our point of departure. And this is a real question of economics and politics. So I consider that Marx and Engels continue to develop that in the Communist Manifesto, even if they don't address the question directly in the Communist Manifesto, but it is their background, you know. And Marx continued that into the Grundrisse, the famous Grundrisse that are considered to be the manuscripts or the notes for Das Kapital. But many of these notes were not used in the Capital. And I consider that it is really a shame. Why? It is because when he's asking the difference in this chapter of Das Kapital between the bee and the architect, he says that where the bee has an instinctual behavior when building his home, if we can say that, it's not a home precisely, the architect has the project and the anticipation of the building in the head. Today we would say in the brain. And he's completely wrong. It is a regression compared with what is said precisely from German ideology to the Grundrisse. During this time, he addressed the question that was this one, the question addressed by Ignaz Meyerson during the 20th century, when Meyerson said, knowledge is never in the brain, never in the head, it is in between people. It is a political and a social and a spatial organization of what he calls works. And when this book the title is Psychological Functions and the Works, he says that the evolution of psychology, he uses psychology in the sense of, I don't remember his name now, I'm sorry. Vygotsky, you know, when Vygotsky gave these extremely important courses on psychology during the 20s in USSR, they say the same thing, that is, the psychological functions that are not only psychological but noetic, intellectual, the functions of knowledge, if you prefer, are not in the brain or in the individual, but in the society, in the social. And this is produced by what he calls, Meyerson calls that the works, but those works are what is described by Marx as techniques, you know, as technological production. So I think we have to go back to the first and the second Marx on these questions. And it is also a question of politics and economics. Why? Because probably you remember that in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels said, today the manual workers are becoming proletarians. And this process of proletarianization is a loss of knowledge, because the knowledge is transformed into machines. This is a process of what I called previously grammatization of the gestures of workers. Now they add that today this is proletarianizing the manual workers, but later it will proletarianize everybody. Engineers and even managers, everybody will be proletarianized by this process of externalization of knowledge into, for example, what we call today algorithms, artificial intelligence. And here, in the Grundrisse, Marx tries to show that it could be, when everybody will have been proletarianized, the possibility and the opportunity to create new form of knowledge. Because the time making free with this process of automation could give the possibility for everybody to cultivate new forms of knowledge. Now, like Heidegger, Marx and Engels didn't address the question of entropy and negentropy. Or more precisely, Engels said in the Dialectic of Nature that entropy is a false, a wrong theory of physics. And of course, he was wrong himself. So I believe that today we have to reinterpret all these works of Marx from the first and second period, but readdressing his questions with the theory of entropy and negentropy. And this is the reason for which I try myself to to address the question of what I call the neg-Anthropocene. You know, maybe that Marx said that capital is destroying nature, and we will have to overcome this destruction of nature. He was maybe one of the first ecologists, you know. Now I consider that today we have to overcome the Anthropocene, that is a destruction by what is called by Moore, the Capitalocene, by producing what I call the neg-Anthropocene. And for that, we need to struggle not only for entropy with an E, but for negantropy with an A and H. And what gives the possibility to produce negantropy, that is to struggle against anthropogenic forcings in the sense of IPCC, is negantropy in this sense with an A and H. And negantropy is always produced by knowledge. So the question today is how to address the question of knowledge from the point of view of architecture. This is, for me, what is our meeting.
Yes, I think there are some problem with the sound. So let me summarize for Vienna so as Marx said that as philosophers, we should not only interpret the world, but also change the world. But if we talk about the situation of an architect today, they should not only change the world. Maybe the word change is not correct, because for me, like the architect is working in the technosphere, as take it as their building site. So their job is not to change the world, but to find the ways for us to live a better life in the technosphere. So it's really a much more difficult question. It's not about ideas, drawings, and designs. It's about the how to find the new ways, invent new lifestyles to live properly in this technosphere, to act as a neganthropic force on this earth. So it's really, I think Brianna has not developed enough to cover all this big issue, but we have to leave it to the other questions. So maybe we'll have time to do later. Now, next, I would move to our main topic. It's about the question why an architect should know his or her own locality. So, Brianna, you should tell us what is locality for you, and specifically, what is locality in your understanding for an architect?
The question of locality is first, what is the condition of life according to Schrödinger? And I continue to believe that. And today, because now I work a lot with biologists and scientists about this question, for example, particularly with Giuseppe Longo and Maël Monteville, they are mathematicians and biologists. And they claim that, yes, we must follow Schrödinger, and I believe they're right, when he says that the definition of life is its capacity to economize, to struggle, to fight against entropy, but such production of neg-entropy or anti-entropy is always local and temporal. It's at the level of the locality that you can organize this fight against entropy. So this is the first question of locality. But if we follow another biologist and mathematician who died in 1948, who the name is Alfred Lotka, I consider him to be extremely important. He said that exactly like Marx and Engels said, the human is constituted by his artificial organs that are what he calls exosomatic organs or exosomatic evolution, not endosomatic, not biological, but organological, that is technological. In such a case, the problem is to produce negentropy and anti-entropy with these exosomatic organs. And such a production of anti-entropy and negentropy is much more complicated because an artificial organ is always both entropic and negentropic. For example, with a computer, you consume energy and you produce entropy. The question is, what will you do with this computer? Are you increasing the rate of entropy, not only in thermodynamics, but also in biology by the destruction, for example, of biodiversity, or in the field of information by destructing noises and knowledge? Or are you increasing the capacity for producing new forms of knowledge, new ways of life, new ways for dwelling, for example, capable to struggle against entropy? In the case of the exosomatic organs, the problem then is an arbitration that is called politics. And politics is a way in which you are optimizing the possibility of exosomatic organization that is a city, for example, because a city, an urban fabric in general, is constituted by exosomatization, of course. But such a process is always a problem of decision, of optimization, and of limitation of the bad side of entropy and increasing of the good side of negentropy. This is a question of politics, but also the question of knowledge. We are what I call simple exorganisms. Why do I mean exorganism? We are not organisms like a dog, for example, or a flower. A flower or dog are organisms in the sense of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and of Charles Darwin. But we are not organisms only, we are exorganisms. If we are deprived of our tools, houses, etc., we can't live. This is what was said by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in The Origin of Inequality in Humankind. So our organs are exosomatized, and our endosomatic organs, our brain, for example, our hands, everything, are reconfigured by such an exosomatization. And this is what was showed by Marianne Wolf, the American neuroscientist. Now, we always live with other simple exorganisms into complex exorganisms. What I call a complex exorganism is, for example, a fabric, for example, a factory, not a fabric, excuse me, a factory, for example, a town, etc., etc. And in these complex exorganisms, we share with other simple exorganisms a place, you know, for working, for consuming, for sleeping, etc., etc., for sailing or buying. Now, there are two kinds of such complex exorganisms. Those I call lower and those I call upper. In the upper one, a law reigns, and such a law is incalculable, and it is produced by the noises as it results from the dwelling of the inhabitants as they produce negentropy together. into what Simondon called the process of collective individuation. Today, it is possible to design cities with an instruction of the inhabitants, giving them the possibility of contributively dwell. This is a reason for which I am myself interested in what is called building information modeling. That is for me a new urban revolution. And this urban revolution is giving two possibilities, is producing two possibilities. One that is to increase entropy and proletarianization, and the other one to reinvent what is dwelling in a city, in an urban milieu.
So I would respond to Vilna's talking about locality by pointing out that for architects, I think they are using the different word, the urban fabric, to replace the concept of locality. So after Vilna's talk, I think I suggest they should try to unite, to put the two concepts together. I checked the concepts before the talk. For example, the Marxist urban theorist Lefebvre defined it as the ancient tombs, a mysterious rock, the gathering, the opening to the cosmos things. He said it's from the countryside, but when it's moved into the city, people believe that's the like the source or the spiritual origin of the city. But actually, it's the human gathering in the countryside that like found the urban fabric. So I think maybe there are some kind of problems with the use of this word in architecture world. I'm not sure. In Vilna's vocabulary, it's the urban fabric should be the localities on the organological, not organic, pharmacological and exosomatic basis kind of location or the opening place. So I think we have already spent more than 50 minutes. So this will be my last question. And we have audience from many websites. So if you can, please raise your questions and put them in the website. We would ask people to collect the questions for them, and we will answer them later. So this is my last question to Birna. So you are talking a lot about the intonation and how should we go on with the course of the League of Nations. That's already more than 100 years old. And it's about the international global union of people, at least of philosophers, maybe. But this year, where the Digital Futures program used a very special slogan. It's called Architects Unite. So we invite you here tonight. So could you help us to clarify the significance of the global unification or the union of architects, especially young architects? What cause do you believe they should fight for in the future? Why we should like to do more of this kind of global union for architects?
You know, our problem, our common problem on the world, in the biosphere, is entropy and the Anthropocene era. We must overcome this situation. We are now reaching the limits. And those limits are really extremely dangerous. For example, I told you that myself, yesterday I had here 35 degrees Celsius as a temperature. It's absolutely abnormal. So we have to completely change our view about what is development, what is urban planning, for example, etc., etc. And for that, we must articulate precisely the questions we addressed previously with Heidegger. How to connect cybernetics, dwelling, and the future. I say cybernetics because you refer to Henri Lefebvre, and he's very famous in China. I know because I gave myself a seminar on Henri Lefebvre in Nanjing. Maybe it was in Hangzhou, I don't remember. Now, Henri Lefebvre rejected, exactly like Heidegger, even if he was not at all a Heideggerian but a Marxist, he rejected the question of cybernetics. And he was really wrong. We consider in this collective, this group that is called the collective internation, we consider that we must reread Marcel Mauss, the French anthropologist, when he said at the beginning of this League of Nations that we should not erase the diversity of localities of nations. It is a wealth. It is a possibility precisely of negentropy. He didn't use this word because this word was not coined at this time. It was in 1920, and the word was coined in 1944. But what it describes is, for me, this question of revaluation of revaluating negentropy and locality. Now, generally, this is the case with Heidegger. There is an opposition between locality and technology, techniques, Gestalt, cybernetics, etc., etc. Myself, I consider that all to the contrary, the pharmacon is always producing new forms of, it can produce new forms of locality. For example, this is what we try to explain here with architects, urbanists, and many other people in this book that was just published last week in France. And this is also what we try to address the question of building information modeling that comes from industry. This is here a boat, you know, a ship that is produced with the technology of building information modeling. And now these companies, this is Dassault Systèmes, they want to produce cities with these technologies. And this produces this, that is a robot replacing the manual workers, the proletarians, because he works 20 times faster than a human. And here we can see that as a catastrophe of destruction of employment, for example, but we can also see that as a new way and a new urban genius, you know, if we are capable to address the question with the young people. Here you see a classroom in which you have people using with these computers the video game Mind Test. Mind Test is a free software version of what is called Minecraft. You probably know Minecraft. That is a video game extremely famous in the youth everywhere in the world. And what do we do with that? We work with them and architects. Why? Because we believe that first, this is what you can do with Mind Test, you know, and this is a representation of a part of the suburbs of Paris. And we are now launching a program with them where we are into 4 years, making them capable to address the question of the future of the city, the urban planning, etc. It is a context of the Olympic Games, you know, because it's in the suburbs of Paris, in the north of Paris, and this is a place where you will have the Olympic Games in 2024. And we are organizing their work and their teaching around this program with this video game and the building information modeling, but also geographic databases, geographic information systems, etc., etc., in order to make them to become relevant for making proposals and new organizations of the districts, for example, etc., etc., new relations in between the public institutions and the private life and the economic life, etc., etc. I will not develop that, but one part that is important is that they also work in order to use clay, crude clay, for producing new types of buildings and with the new types of companions of workers, using robots for producing these buildings and inventing a new way, much more negantropic for building. So I say that very fast, very quickly, because we don't have time, but if you are interested in this, I can give you many informations on the website. I think it is a reinvention of the role of the architect. Today, the architect must work with the inhabitants, not only with those who are giving the orders for building, for example, those investors in construction, in building. It is important to create new communities and new urban localities with people sharing a common project. And it is possible to make this. Why? Because between video games, building information modeling, smart cities, etc., the question is always the same. It is grammatization, and how you can use grammatization as a pharmacon with which you can increase entropy and proletarianization and stupidity. But exactly the contrary, on the contrary, you can develop the common knowledge, the economy, what we call economy of contribution, etc., that is based on the process of deproletarianization and invention of new ways of working based on new knowledge. So I was obliged to go very fast, so I'm sorry, but now I can answer your questions.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I really appreciate your contribution to this project, and I enjoyed very much the conversation. So, before I put my control back to Philip, I would summarize your message in these two slides. First, you told us that we must reinvent architecture among younger generations. Second, you told us that we should, when we're doing architecture in the city, we have to find the urban locality for people, not only for the architects. So it's really a very clear message. And I hope the architects in the audience would join us in the conversation. So in the following, we'll open up to the questions. And I hope Philip would help us collect the questions. So I would choose some of them first. Now, the one question is from Yang Guang. May I ask, in what sense is the coronavirus a kind of entropic forces, as Mr. Stiegler describes it? So, Birna, is coronavirus a kind of entropic forces?
Yeah. You know that this problem of this pandemic is the loss of immune defenses by people. The problem with the virus is that the virus needs to find a new host, you know, for a reason, because it cannot develop in the normal host, that is generally an animal. It needs to move towards a new kind of host. Generally, this migration of the virus is limited because of the immune resistance. of the immune system of the humankind. Now, in the case, first, you must know that from the after the Second World War, there was an increase, a very strong increasing of the development of new forms of infections by virus and bacteria. Someone published in the Institut Pasteur last week in France a comparison of the curve of the acceleration of consumption by the exportation of the American way of life, first in Europe and then everywhere in the world, even in China now, and with consumption of cars, everything, television, etc. And the curve of pandemics after the Second World War, the acceleration is exactly the same. Now you must know probably that since 1997, a new form of viruses appeared in China. Not only in China, mainly in Asia, but particularly in China. And these new forms were always accelerating their transformations because a virus is always transforming its ARN, you know. So this acceleration is considered to be produced by the fact that the anthropization of geographic of countries that were white countries previously, for example, with the deforestation, with the production of palm oil, etc., are creating new contacts between human and animals, but also with the acceleration of commerce, of globalization. There is also an acceleration of the migration of the virus through goods, through commodities, etc., through industrial production. So today, there is a consensus everywhere in the world for claiming that this pandemic, for example, was very dangerous, not because of the virus itself. It is not so dangerous. But what is extremely dangerous is the acceleration of its circulation, but also the decreasing of immune resistance of the humans. Why? Because of a standardization of food. For example, today in China, you eat sugar, you consume milk, etc., etc. It was not the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago. In Amazonia, in America, in Europe, you had many, many kinds of systems of food and of cooking, of agriculture. And this was producing a diversity of what is called the micro, I don't know the word in English. Let's say, we call that in French, microtop. That this is the bacteria you have in your intestines, you know, and that are producing and specifying your immune defenses. And the diversity of these immune defenses is extremely important for protecting humankind. Today, this diversity is destroyed. What I call here diversity is what is called by Schrödinger locality. So it is the question of changing industrial economy into not a process only a process of standardization, but in a process of adopting standards for producing diversity. And this is where the role of artists and thinkers, and an architect is both an artist and a thinker. So I think this is the reason for which we need to create new groups with biologists, mathematicians, physicists, architects, doctors, philosophers, etc., for organizing a new immunity, a new political economy based on the process of immunization. But this is not the question of closing the borders, you know, because this is what is said today by Donald Trump. But the question is not at all to close the borders. It is to open the borders, but to open them in a negantropic way. So for making circulating not viruses, but knowledge, for organizing exchange between countries, nations, etc., based on noesis. This was, you know, the discourse of Alfred Einstein when he said we should organize a scientific international. He said this against the Nazis when they wanted to create a German science against the other, etc., etc. So we are revisiting, discovering the question of the beginning of the 20th century, but in the field, in the frame, in the context of the of the Anthropocene. At this time, at the beginning of the 20th century, nobody had any idea about the question of pollution, of entropy, etc., etc. So today we are confronted with this, with almost 8 billion of people on Earth, and we have 10 years in order to change the situation. So yes, this is for me the stakes. These are the stakes of the experience of pandemics.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Vienna. I would like to add to a little bit. I read your recent interviews, and you talked about the precarity on the global scale. So the audience tries to ask you whether the coronavirus is an entropic force. So I think there are two levels. Globally, it's really very dangerous and put everyone in a very precarious position. But if we talk about the locality, as you have told us that if we start our defense from the locality, that will be the strategy. So I would like to point out the strategies from the local side. Now we know that the industry, the platforms are fabricating. For me, it's like the precarity is not the natural consequences. It's the result of the fabrication of, I would say, the calculative industry. So the more they produce this kind of the consumerist culture and our behaviors, so that would contribute to the precarity on the global scale. But the hope is on the other side, because we can live locally like an artist, that we can find our own way of invent new ways of living. So if we want to really fight against the virus, I think it's not on the industrial side. It should be on our own side. It would depend on our own invention, our own maybe own collective efforts. It's kind of our efforts put into the building of the locality. Of course, it will be new, but the virus is kind of pushing force for us to start doing that.
Yeah. Yes, of course. But for me, there is no opposition between locality, individual or small communities, initiatives, and industry. I believe that we have to invent a new kind of industry that is managing the possibility of localization of such production of local wealth, for example. And the question is behind, you refer to the platforms of calculation. The most important are American and Chinese. Mm-hmm. These platforms must be completely reinvented and changed into a new kind of what I call theoretical computer science. All our system today is based on what is called Turing machine. We are now, for example, using Zoom, the platform Zoom, that is Facebook, and we use it through computers. Myself, I use a MacBook Air that is produced in China, and I don't know which brand is yours, but they are called Turing machines. And these Turing machines are considered to be able to solve any question through algorithms and computation. I'm launching a new group, an international one, with people from everywhere, even China, particularly through UQE. That is a group of computer scientists, mathematicians, etc. And we say that a computer is not a Turing machine, and that a computer is dangerous because a computer is not addressing the question of locality. And we must change the architecture of computer science, of computers, of computer machines, of machines of calculation. We must introduce entropy and negentropy into the functions of the computers as a problem that must be not solved, but decided by people, not by algorithms. Because when you replace everything by algorithms, you are destroying the possibility of negentropy. This was demonstrated mathematically by Ludwig and Bertalanffy, but also it was demonstrated anew through social networks in the University of Virginia 4 years ago by a mathematician. The name is John Faltz. So we consider that we have to reinvent computer science in order to make it capable to value negentropy, diversity, localities, etc., and to give the possibility in between localities to create networks, not for erasing diversity, but exactly on the contrary, to increase the wealth of this diversity. So there is no opposition between industry and, for example, philosophical work or artistic work. You can do anything today as a philosopher, for example, or as an architect by using these technologies. And we are doing this now with this Zoom communication. And after that, you will be obliged to work with building information modeling, even if you don't like it, because it is a new dynamic. So the question is not to resist against these technologies, is to modify them and to modify the use and the practice of these technologies. Why? For modifying the social relationship, the social dynamics. And this is the reason for which I said it's a question of political economy and also of libidinal economy.
Thank you, Bernard. So I would contact Philip. Philip, could you collect questions for us from the Bilibili and YouTube?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
It's a fantastic lecture and talks between Professor Stiegler and Professor Lu. I think it's extremely interesting. From an architect's perspective, I think it's a great comments from Stiegler to what we're doing on this platform. It's because right now the digital future is this new kind of knowledge platform. We'll try to reorganize the ways how to teaching and how to learning. Actually, more than 80 workshops is actually the instructors is not only professor, but also some PhD student and some researchers. It's kind of a democracy to reorganize the new knowledge and how to spreading, how to learning. So I think it's a kind of feedback to the talks. I think we are doing something which is really put forward a kind of new knowledge system, a new platform, contribute to the new knowledge system. So the new knowledge is coming so fast. I think the invention of the new system of learning is a kind of Necker entropy process in architecture discipline. So that is first feedback from myself. And then we have several questions. Maybe I just select 2 or 3 and asking to Stiegler, Bernard. So the first day about the architecture. So because we are architects, so you are talking about the locality, which is to architects means more to the sustainable process to make the cultural things more sustainable, which is a renovation, or we try to find some new possibilities to keep not only the economics growing, but also can keep the culture, which could be like sustainable to the built environment. So I mean, the question goes to what do you mean the locality, the concept of locality and the Necker entropy process? Is there any relevant relationship between this kind of cultural aspects to the economic growing, how to balance or how to integrate this kind of cultural thing and economic growing things? Because the paradox is coming, for example, in China, in the local area, a lot of empty village, because all the young generation, they're looking forward to earn more money. They're moving from the small town to the big city. So it's kind of leaving their hometown. And the fabric of the rural area in China, compared to the high density, high rise city like Shanghai, is quite a big paradox. It's quite different. The young generation, they don't like to living in the countryside. That's a paradox to the phenomenon in China. So the question goes to how to invent certain kind of new system, new knowledge system, or new social system to attract the young generation going back to the rural area, and how to set up kind of new ways to attract people back and to make even more economic growing inside the rural area. So is that a kind of Necker entropy process? So it seems not very, it's a little bit negative, because the process of urbanization is still growing in China. So do you mean the Necker entropy process in Anthropocene should invent some new social or economic process to doing some diverse process compared to the urbanization? So that's the first question. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about.
Thank you. First, I will answer what you said yourself about education, because this is a very, very important question. And myself, I am now launching a new initiative in France towards the Ministry of Education in order to launch what I call contributive research, associating students, teachers, researchers, scientists, and artists, etc., to reinvent the institutions of education. Because after 3 months of confinement here, of lockdown in France, and during this time, probably it was the same in China, people were obliged to teach through this platform, Zoom, we are using now, and the parents were also obliged to study, to help their children to study at home, etc., etc. This created a very important reflection, deliberation, thinking about what is to educate. And it is also in the context of the crisis of education, a crisis that is also a crisis that was also evoked by Xinghua about the conflict between generations, etc., etc. And yourself, you address the question from the problem of those young people who want to move to the cities, to urban milieus, and to leave rural milieus. I think that we have to completely redefine what we call knowledge. For me, knowledge is not only what is taught in universities and high schools, etc., and institutions. It is also the everyday life knowledge, hospitality, for example, and all of these cooking. All that is so important in China and so good in China. This is really something extremely important to protect in China. That is the diversity of cooking and the knowledge of cooking. Now, all of this is destroyed by consumption, by consumerism. And it is a case because of a question of industrial economy, because for a businessman, industrial economy is first of all economy of scales. And what is called economy of scales is, in this context, based on the destruction of diversity, the standardization. I consider that this is what we have to change, and that it is possible to change it. And for that, we need what we call an economy of contribution that is based on the valuation of knowledge of the manual worker, that is how to do, the knowledge of the inhabitant, that is dwelling precisely in the sense of Heidegger, and that is dwelling in community with the neighborhood, etc., etc. This is completely destroyed today, not only by TV and supermarkets, etc., but also now by social networking. Now I consider myself, I'm specifying with industrials in France a new kind of social networking that is localized. It is capable to connect with other social localized networks, but the rules of participation in such social networks are completely different from what is the case on Snapchat or Facebook, etc., etc. Because we are addressing the question of negentropy first, and second, there are many limitations of the algorithms for avoiding the algorithms to decide for yourself or for the group. The idea being exactly on the contrary, to evaluate the local groups in order to make them developing what is called collective intelligence. So I think that in such a view, it is possible to overcome the opposition, not the difference, of course, but the opposition between the countryside and the urban side. It's also a question, a very interesting question to see that you probably know that Detroit, the city of cars, of Ford and General Motors, that is now a phantom town, is transformed into a new kind of urban agriculture that is based on permaculture, etc. That's very, very impressive. You have many people who are now producing vegetables, etc., in these ancient factories. I say that why? Because I think that something is happening extremely fast, and that is completely changing what we consider to be the unmovable functions of industry, etc., and differentiation, the opposition, for example, between industrial and craft skills, etc., etc. This is completely changing also through the Fab Labs and those new means of production. And behind all of this, the real question for me is to change accountability. To change accountability, because the real point of departure of industrial economy is not only the machinery, it is accountability. This is the reason for which Max Weber was right when he said that capitalism starts with accountability. That is, writing the debts and the credits, etc., etc., and sharing the process of through coins, through I don't remember the name in English, I'm sorry, currencies, to learn how to count, because a French historian showed that learning counting started not with schools, but with the use of currencies, of coins, you know. Now, I say that because the basis of capitalism and market economy is currencies, and these currencies, this money, let's say, is producing a process of accountability. Now, this accountability today is based on the valuation of entropy. The more you produce entropy, the more you win money. And this is what we have to change. Today, what we are developing in the north of Paris is an economy of contribution in which the accountability is based on struggling or fighting against entropy. And we completely change the economic indicators. And today we are engaging big companies like Danone, that is one of the most important company in agro industry, Société Générale, that is the most important bank in France, etc., because they see that the development of the current economy based on entropic accountability is finished. It is irrational. It is destroying everything. So they are moving towards this. And I think here you don't have oppositions between countryside and town, for example. Now, if we want to develop that, we have to redevelop new kinds of infrastructures, new kinds of networks, new institutions for producing knowledge, sharing knowledge, invention, etc. And we have also to practice what we call contributive research, in which we make people who are, for example, PhD candidates or postdoc candidates, we give them money under the condition they work with inhabitants on the locality for solving or studying precise questions and problems identified by the population, and with cooperation with companies, with administrations, etc., etc. So we are living today this complete mutation of industrial development. Maybe we will not be able to change this quickly, and in such a case we will have much more difficult problems than the pandemic we knew during the last year, because we are creating the conditions for an explosion of such problems. So the question is, I hope Donald Trump will not be elected in 2 months or 3 months, and that we will have Joe Biden, not because I don't believe that Joe Biden is very interesting, but Trump is silly, and his conflict against China is extremely dangerous, because he makes China itself in a reaction against such an aggressivity, and this blocks the possibility to evolve and to change this situation. Now, if Biden appears, probably myself, I will launch a movement for obliging America and China to discuss in a new in a new style, let's say, and about these questions, because I think it is the condition for the future, this discussion. And I would like, of course, to convince European Union to participate to these discussions.
Yeah, great. I think another very interesting topic Professor Lu put forward is the main topic of Digital Future this year, Architects United. I think Bernard make a really interesting analyze through the new form of locality, should based on the new knowledge such as robotics, BIM, or redesign the city, even though like some video game is kind of very well reorganized or updated version of the infrastructure system to provide a certain kind of new organization which can do something negative entropy, give new contribution advantage to the real growing forces which compete with some capital-driven entropy, right? I think the most interesting, what we are doing actually right now is very similar to what Bernard mentioned. We're making some research on the robotic as a new kinds of infrastructure system, which can not only based on that platform, can help not only to build in the mega city, but we especially focus on the rural area. If this kind of a new infrastructure system could increase the new industry for this kind of customized small scale village house, I think it's kind of something, give the quick feedback to the Architects Unite. Maybe after coronavirus, the new creation, new economic growing need to be found to make more laborers or more architects. They can find some more bottom-up ways to make driven the economic growth, maybe not just by the capital investment from the super big company and from the capital games that's already played in the last 20 years in China. I think probably out of stream right now, because it's really difficult to organize such kind of mass production under the pressure of the pandemic spreading. So everything like shock stopped. But it's great time for us to organize this discussion, organize this special digital future discussion to rethinking on what kind of a new system or new forces can help us to find some new engine to driven to be the forces to driven the future growing. I think economic should be still growing, otherwise would be disaster. But I totally agree with Bernard talking about it should be a smart new intelligence. The new intelligence is kind of infrastructure system. The data maybe could be layered, set up by the layers to give new delegate process or the advantage of new opportunities to the young generation, to the rural area people. And that probably could be a new chances for us to do. I think it's great. I can got a lot of information from this lecture, from this talking. I think some architects on the website is asking the same question I would like to put forward to Bernard, because you use a word grammarization to architects. You're at the very beginning of the lecture talking about the architects is doing some grammarization process to the city, to the architecture. So could you give us some analyze on this word? What do you mean the grammarization to architects? So at least three architects. Yeah. They're asking this question.
The word, the word is grammatization, no?
Yeah, grammatization. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What I call grammatization comes from the work of a French historian and philosopher of linguistics. The name is Sylvain Auroux. He talks about the conditions of the appearance of grammata, that is alphabetic writing, 3 million years ago, around Mediterranean, around Greece and this region of the West. And he tried to show that this process of grammatization, that is of the appearance of ta grammata in Greek, the letters in English, could appear. And he said, generally people thought that these grammata were invented by grammarians or logicians. And he showed that it is exactly the contrary. Grammata, the alphabetic writing, appeared exactly like a process of a technical invention, that is, nobody is really willing to produce that. It is produced with no conscience, and it appears through a transformation that takes, let's say, 6 centuries between Mesopotamia and Greece, and by a process of transformation that is not conscious. And those who are living this are not aware about this. If I precise this, is because I consider the question is techniques here. The process of grammatization is a dimension of the evolution of techniques, and precisely of those specific techniques and technologies that are what I call hypomnesic tertiary retentions. That are these technologies of memory, of the process of externalization and transmission of memory from generations to generations. You know, of course, that the basis of civilizations are the appearance of such hypomnesic tertiary tensions, like in China, in Egypt, in South America too, in Africa too. And because we don't know now, those were destroyed, but there were also other forms of writing in, for example, South America with Incas, etc. And this process for me of grammatization is not only the one of speech. And in China, it is not at all the one of speech, because Chinese writing at the beginning is not writing of language as such, but it is another kind of writing that is still a mystery for Westerners, and fascinating reality that was, you know, probably that one of the most important inspiration of Leibniz, the German philosopher Gottlieb Leibniz, who created what he called the Characteristica Universalis. That was the first theory of coding as it was concretized by mechanography and then in computer science. Well, I say that because the process of grammatization for me starts during the Upper Paleolithic in the caves, when the humankind is capable not only of producing new weapons, for example, flintstone tools, but or many other kind of lithic weapons, lithic exosomatized organs. But when grammatization starts, when the humankind is capable to exteriorize or externalize his memory and his dreams his representations, you can see in the prehistoric caves what was seen or imagined by the human, prehistoric human, for 40,000 years ago, you know, for example. I was told 2 months ago that now a new cave was discovered in Australia that is 70,000 years old, and in which you have paintings, sculptures, etc. This is for me the beginning of grammatization. Mm-hmm. And I consider that such a grammatization is always defined by many, many aspects, but two most important aspects. The first being reproduction. You can, during this upper Paleolithic period, reproduce the imagination of the vision of the viewing of those people of this time. But you can also produce a discretization, that is a list of forms, a list of objects that will be, for example, in the case of Chinese ideographic writing, 30,000 characters, if I am well informed. In the case of alphabetic writing, 26 characters that are not characters by grammata precisely in Greek. But this is the beginning of a process that will be changed, for example, with the printing press, and then with the appearance of reproduction of sound through the phonograph, transmission of sound through the telephone, reproduction of the visible through the photograph, etc., etc. This is the stake of the work by Walter Benjamin on photography and cinema, reproduction of movement with cinema, with television, etc. And today with computers. All these technologies are, for me, technologies of grammatization. Now, in architecture, it is extremely important because you have, with the appearance of drawings and conventional drawings, conventional that is with definitions of conventions of representation, like in geography and cartography, you know, you have a process of grammatization of the objects of architecture. In the West, Vitruve is the most important historian of architecture who describes this process of categorization of the parts of architecture. Today, for me, the building information modeling and management is a new age of grammatization of architecture. The question that were addressed by Lu Xinghua concerning dwelling with Heidegger is, for me, not for Heidegger, but for me, this is the question of how is it possible to make this new process of grammatization changing not only the industry of building, the ways of design by architects of buildings, but the ways of dwelling in the sense of Heidegger. And I believe that it is possible, not only because it's good, but it is because it is absolutely necessary. If we don't do that, we will not be able to produce sustainable buildings, sustainable cities, and we will destroy our milieu. So it is, for me, you know, I am a rationalist, so I believe that it is necessity that makes the future. It's also freedom. The possibility, you have the freedom to choose the best or the worst, you know. And this is what is said by Arnold Toynbee at the beginning of a famous book, I don't remember the title in English, where he tries to describe what is the process of civilization. He talks a lot about China. He knows a little bit China. And for example, what is very specific in China is that the beginning of China is based on another process of grammatization. The first course I gave in Nanjing University, it was 6 years ago, was dedicated to Chinese geometry and Greek geometry. And I tried to show that, you know, that Joseph Needham, the English historian and anthropologist and also scientist, was a specialist of China and wrote a book about this question, differences between Chinese geometry and Greek geometry. I think that the stake of the difference is the difference between grammatization. And that it is a very, very important question. Now we have a process of unification of these grammatization, these kinds of grammatizations because of the globalization. But the question is now how to practice these globalized processes of grammatization for producing diversity. And here, I don't know the Chinese history, so I'm not capable to see that in Chinese history. But in European history, you can see, for example, you can show that when the Athenians, it was in 406 years before Christus, decided to oblige all the Great Greece to adopt one alphabet, because previously they had very diverse forms of alphabet. It was a process of standardization. But this process of standardization produced an incredible diversity, because all those people from Athens, Ionia, Sparta, etc., etc., the colonies everywhere in Europe they created, having the same alphabet, they could exchange and create very, very different uses of this alphabet, very different forms of literature, of philosophy, of science, of history, of laws, etc., etc. So I think that today, this is the stake, how to practice grammatization in a way that makes possible a new process of diversification, that is of localization.
Yeah, that's fabulous analyzation. I think we need time to understand and to make more research on the grammatization. I think it's a great words, which including